Hello, good morning, and welcome to this internal and external challenges around BIM adoption and how to overcome them webinar. Today with me on the panel is Gary Patterson, who is BSI's certification technical expert for BIM and digital construction. Gary has been instrumental in shaping and leading BSI's certification solutions for BIM design and construction. Gary also works with a range of stakeholders in the supply chain to ensure that they meet industry requirements, and he has very good in-depth knowledge of assessing companies globally against BIM standards. Gary has also studied theoretical physics, so I'll try not to get him started on the magnetic dipole moments. We'll be here for a while. Gary's also joined by Peter Saddington, or Pete as he likes to be known. Pete is BSI's Senior Business Development Manager for BIM. Pete joined BSI in 2015, and in that time he has specialized in the built environment and construction product sectors. Working with clients every day, Pete has a very thorough understanding of the processes and challenges that not just main contractors go through with BIM, but also their supply chains. Pete's also a keen cyclist, and he's a bit of a Bradley Wiggins, I think when he was a youngster as well. My name's Robert Lee, and I'm here to help facilitate your presentation as BSI UK's Media Production Manager. So without further ado, now let me transfer you over to your first presenter, Pete Saddington.
Okay, thank you, Rob. Good morning, everyone. As Rob said, my name is Pete Saddington, and I'm the Senior Business Development Manager at BSI for BIM and the built environment. Today, we're going to go through a little bit of an introduction into who BSI are. Rob's already introduced Gary and myself. And then we're going to go straight into a poll looking at the internal challenges around BIM and how to overcome those as well. Gary's then going to take over, and we're going to look at PAS 91 and applying for tenders, give you an overview of a typical BIM assessment and overcoming external obstacles with BIM as well, and we'll have a bit of a discussion around those. We're also going to look at some of the benefits of BIM certification for design and construction and the resources available to support you. So without further ado, let's carry on. So a little bit about BSI to start with. We were the world's first national standards body. We were established in 1901, and we're also a founding member of ISO and IEC. They're the European and international standards bodies. We're trusted as a Royal Charter company, and I'll explain a little bit more about what that means shortly. We also specialize in what we do. So we offer not just standards creation, but training, certification, and software solutions. We also look at supporting supply chain, and we also have a specialist consultancy arm as well. And we're reputable. We're thought leaders, especially with the way the BIM standards are going. The UK version of the standards is actually forming the base documentation for the ISO, and we've also shaped some of the world's most adopted standards worldwide. So a little bit about the Royal Charter to start with. BSI, as I said, is a Royal Charter business. This means we are a profit-making organisation, but instead of having shareholders, we reinvest all of our profits back into the business. An element of that is ring-fenced, and that's the National Standards Body. They are responsible for gathering committees and publishing standards, such as the PAS 1192 suite and the BS 1192 standard. And the side of the business that I work for specifically offer assessment and certification against standards, compliance support and training, and we also have an advisory arm as well, which we mentioned previously. Within the built environment, we very much started off within construction products and fire suppression. You may be familiar with the kite mark from products such as windows and doors, manhole covers, and fire extinguishers as well. Recently, we've moved into offering certification and services around building information modeling, but we also offer things around energy performance of buildings, sustainable construction and infrastructure, asset management, and where we're going as a business, which is quite exciting, is looking at smart cities and the Internet of Things as well. So that's a little bit about who BSI are. I'll now hand you over to Rob for the first poll.
Thank you very much, Pete. Okay, so our first poll is going to be, where are you on your BIM journey? So this is a question where we're asking you to select one. Please let us know if you're new to BIM and you're just fact-finding currently at the minute, whether your company is applying for a tender which requires BIM, whether you've undertaken BIM training and you're now looking for the next steps, whether your company has undertaken a BIM project, or whether it's running multiple BIM projects at the minute. So here are the results. Where are you on your BIM journey? So the poll results are 47% of you said I'm new to BIM and fact finding. 6% said my company is applying for a tender which requires BIM. So that's good to hear. 3% said, I've undertaken BIM training and I'm looking for my next steps. We have 6% of you who have undertaken a BIM project. Then we have a massive amount of you, 38% of you, who say that you're currently running multiple BIM projects. Right, now I'm just going to close that poll and then transfer you over to Gary for the next part of the presentation.
Thank you, Rob. Thanks. Yes, so my name's Gary Patterson. So I'm a certification technical expert here at BSI. So what that means is over the last 3 years, I've been developing and I now manage all of BSI's BIM certification products, which we now have 3 of, which I'm going to talk about today. So the 3 things I want to discuss today are essentially what is the scope of our BSI Kite Mark certification? So what standards are relevant? What do you need to comply with in order to gain certification? The second thing is, what is the assessment evidence we look for? So if we were to turn up at your site to do an assessment, what is it that you need to demonstrate to us to show compliance against the standard? And then the last thing is some information on the practical requirements or the assessment journey. So how many days, who needs to be there, what sites do we need to visit, the practical requirements of the scheme. And looking at the poll results, we have quite an opposite of quite a polarity of knowledge. So I'll try to keep this interesting, I hope, for those that are new to BIM as well as those that are already delivering BIM. So first of all, I just want to talk about our Kite Mark certification against PAS 1192 Part 2, which is the design and construction phase. What we're looking to achieve here, so everyone's trying to achieve this BIM level 2. So this is the government condition of contract that came in, where all those tendering for a central government project have to show compliance to BIM level 2. So this is the first scheme that we developed. So this is what we want to talk about today. Okay, now the way in which the government are enforcing this this requirement is through the use of the pre-qualification questionnaire, PAS 91. So I mean, I'm sure most of you are familiar with this PQQ, but there's a section at Table 8 which is all about BIM, and there's a series of questions that need to be answered that demonstrate how both the knowledge and capability of the organisation going through tender. But there is a clause at the start which says that if you hold third-party certification against PAS 1192 Part 2, then this section of the PQQ can be skipped. So this is why the first focus in developing BIM certification products was against PAS 1192 Part 2. Okay, and to put it into context, so the UK government have commissioned a series of standards to support BIM adoption. So here we have a very simplified model of an asset life cycle, from brief all the way through to decommissioning. So first we have PAS 1192 Part 2. So this covers all the way from the brief to the handover phase. So that's the end of the construction phase. We then have PAS 1192 Part 3. This kicks in at the handover phase and is applicable all the way to the decommissioning phase. We have BS 1192. Now this is actually written before the PAS documents, which is why it's not numbered. But so this essentially describes the common data environment. So or the CDE. So this is the way in which information and data needs to be shared across a project team. So this is one of the core requirements of BIM adoption. We then have BS 1192 Part 4. So this, which is known as COBE. So this is essentially a schema for transferring structured information on maintainable assets. So it's a spreadsheet, but it's a pre-organized spreadsheet that's used to populate. And the analogy that's often used is it's the suitcase for transmitting the information from the person who creates the information to the recipient. We then have PAS 1192 Part 5. This is the design and construction. This is the information security standard, and this is applicable across the whole asset life cycle. Great. So this is the suite of standards. Now we're talking today about the design and construction phase. So we can see from here that the relevant standards are, of course, PAS 1192 Part 2. BS 1192 is also applicable, but so is BS 1192 Part 4. So these are the 3 standards that need to be complied with in order to gain Kite Mark certification for the design and construction phase of BIM Level 2. I'm going to pass you back to Rob, who has our second poll.
Thank you very much, Gary. Okay, so our next poll is, can you let us know currently what is the greatest internal challenge facing your organization to adopt BIM? And this is for you to select one. We want to know what is the greatest one that's currently facing you right now. So it's not about something that might have happened previously or in the past. It's where you're at right now. So do let us know whether it is convincing the board, whether it's the fear of the new and reluctance to let go of old methods, whether it's investing in new technology perhaps, or whether it's finding the right resources to deliver your projects, or whether it's a roll-up of costs. So here are the results. Currently, what is the greatest internal challenge facing your organization to adopt BIM? 9% of you said that it's convincing the board. 44% of you, which is the top answer, said it's the fear of the new and reluctance to let old methods go. Gladly, none of you said investing in new technology, so it sounds like there is a willingness there. The next is finding the right resources to deliver. 38% of you said this was the next top answer for what's the greatest internal challenge. And then finally, it's 9% for costs. Those are some very interesting results.
Yes, I would agree totally, and it really ties in with what we see day in, day out when we talk to our clients. Just to sort of pick up on a couple of those, obviously the internal resistance there, the fear of the new, reluctance to let old methods go. It's very common in construction. It's traditionally an industry that can be quite resistant to change. And people are very proud of the job that they do and how they do it, and rightfully so. This is one that will change slowly through various different industry initiatives such as the BIM regions, events like Digital Construction Week. The adoption throughout the industry will eventually reach a critical mass. Again, it is a question of the BIM converts, if you like, within the industry, demonstrating the value of BIM to the people in an organization who are resistant to changing the way they work. Because if it's going to make things a little bit easier, perhaps, certainly more cost effective, and this will tie into the point earlier about convincing the board as well, then certainly there's a huge benefit there, and that's where it'll start to gain some traction. One of the other big challenges that people see and has been highlighted there is I call it I'm the BIM manager, and it's finding the right resources to deliver. So being in discussions with various different companies, it's not uncommon for us to find that everyone who's responsible for BIM in different organizations has a different title. In some companies they're called the BIM manager, in some they may be an architectural technologist, a CAD assistant, a BIM lead, head of innovation. There's so many different job titles that do pretty much the same role. And a lot of the time, whoever's responsible for BIM is doing it alongside the day job that they were hired to do. This can hamper BIM adoption in organizations when the day job element gets quite busy. I'm sure you've all sort of seen it where a tender comes in and the BIM lead gets pulled out of writing the BIM process and procedures to work on that tender. Where organizations that we've worked with have managed to overcome this is that they've really tried to set aside time with the support of the colleagues and management. So again, in the spirit of BIM, working in collaboration with the board, with their senior managers, they've explained the value of BIM and trying to get away from a cost exercise, more of a value that what we're going to do in this new way is actually going to reap benefits for the business moving forwards. When that message has got across, they've been able to set aside the time to put those elements in place. The cost of BIM as well. Again, some people have said that is a challenge, and again, construction and the construction industry is generally sort of very cost conscious. The cost of implementing BIM itself shouldn't be too high in terms of monetary value. Obviously systems are expensive and the hardware required to run them also costs money. but the actual process and procedures can be implemented relatively inexpensively. A lot of the documentation is freely available on the internet. There is a slide later on which will point out the BIM-level2.org website, where all of the BIM standards can be downloaded for free of charge. The CIC BIM protocol and the government soft landing documents are also free to download from the internet as well. So aside from time and systems, the cost of implementing BIM shouldn't need to be that high. That's sort of where a lot of our clients have found that they've been able to to implement that and get over that obstacle. So I'm going to pass back to Gary, who's going to go through the detail in a little bit.
Thanks, Pete. That's great. That's really interesting. So I'm going to carry on my discussion. So we've talked about what's the scope of the certification. So what standards are applicable? When it came to develop a certification product or against the design and construction phase of a project, so there's two key things we recognized. So there's going to be the first of that is from any given organization within the supply chain, there's going to be a difference in the type of information that they generate and manage. The second difference between tier 1 and non-tier 1 is the management responsibilities of that organization. And the first key objective that we need to satisfy in our certification product is that it's applicable to all members of the supply chain. So it's not just a client product, it's not just a tier 1 product, it's a product that's applicable across the whole supply chain. This is why the assessment and scope will reflect your role and responsibilities. So I mentioned the 3 standards above that are applicable for certification. Now, not all clauses within those standards are going to be applicable to you. This depends on your organization. So what information you deliver and what management responsibilities that you have. So this would be one of the first things that we ascertain from yourself is what is your role in the supply chain? What responsibilities with respect to BIM do you have? We will then create a scope to reflect that, and then your final certification will be against your scope of activities. So this is really important. With that in mind, there is still a lot to think about with our scheme. So what we've done with all of our BIM products is we've created what's called a shaping workshop. So this is where we've gathered stakeholders and we've brought them into BSI, and we've essentially asked them to help us create a certification product to ensure that what we create best reflects the industry needs. And this shaping group started off with 4 members. I think now we must be up to around 20 members now. So it's been a very collaborative way of working, which I think reflects the BIM philosophy. So when shaping our client mark against PAS 1192 Part 2, so that's design and construction phase, there were 3 main questions that we asked the stakeholder group. The first of which was, what should be the scope of PAS 1192 part certification? So what elements should we bring in? What parts of each of those standards are really important, and should we add in any additional requirements to the client mark, such as compliance with 9001? The second thing we asked for is what are the benefits of gaining BSI client mark certification? And there's always a difficult moment. We have to ask the group whether or not certification is actually needed, because if we are going to work collaboratively, we have to accept what they say. So that's the second one, and then the third one was the practical requirements of certification. So what are the things that we need to look at? How should we assess each of the requirements above? So these are the 3 things we asked our shaping group. And the result of that shaping group, so the first one was that one of the core pieces of evidence we need to look for is that there needs to be a controlled, documented process of how your BIM deliverables are achieved. So here we have a process map or a schematic of the 1192 process in general. So we can see it goes from pre-contract all the way to handover, starting off with the EIR at the top. So what we look for, I mean, I'm not going to go into the detail of all of this, but the key point is that each of these deliverables and relationships, you would need to produce a controlled documented process of how this is done, and importantly how it's controlled. So for example, if you're involved in the production of the BEP, how that's done, how you ensure that it complies with the specific requirements of the EIR. If you're a member of the supply chain, how do you make sure that you comply with the BEP requirements? How do you deliver the contractual responsibilities of your organization? Okay, and then doing this, what we noticed is that this has a strong synergy with the principal philosophy of 9001, which is the Plan, Do, Check, Act. So this is why we brought in a line with 9001, in that we require you to have a 9001 equivalent system. So that doesn't mean you have to have a 9001 certification. Of course, that's great. But if you don't, it needs to be underpinned by an equivalent system to 9001. Moving on, so the common data environment. So I mentioned this. This is described in BS 1192. Remember, this is how you share information across organizations within a project. So I just wanted to have one slide on this, just because it's a particularly important aspect, and I just want to give you an idea of how we actually assess against the common data environment. So there's three areas that we look at. First is the architecture of the common data environment. So that's what software or softwares are being used, where the information is being stored. So this is the architecture of the CDE. Second is the process. So how the CDE is set up and managed throughout a project. And then the last one is functionalities. This is looking at CDE managed in practice. So ensuring that things like the correct file naming conventions are being used, the correct metadata and coding is being used. And across each of these three areas, we look at all of the components around the outside. So all the way from the setup from the sharing to all the way to the destruction. So these are the key areas where we look for during the assessment of the common data environment. Great. Okay, so moving on to the next component. So one of the key features of Kitemark is that there needs to be a measurable. When we come to your site, there needs to be something that we measure. And this was actually a challenging question that we had to ask with the shaping group, is when we come to your site, what should we measure that demonstrates what good looks like, or how well a project is being carried out. So what we have here is we have along the top, we have the different areas of the PAS 1192 Part 2 process, and then what we look for, using a sample-based approach, that we look for evidence of components across different projects that collectively form a group of evidence that reflects your scope of activities. So this could be it could be one project, it could be several projects, and we use a sample-based approach to look at demonstrable evidence of applying your processes. And bear in mind, along that top, some of those processes may not be applicable to you. For example, co-production. On many occasions, or I should say most occasions, clients do not specify co-production. So if that's the case, then we wouldn't look for that. Now we come on to the additional features. So these are the features that go above and beyond merely complying with the clauses within the 1192 standards. So the first of these are, we want the Kitemark to demonstrate not only do you have the capability of delivering BIM level 2 projects, and that you are delivering projects, but you're delivering projects well. And the way in which we measure that is we gauge the strength of the project based on how satisfied your clients are. So that could be, if you're a member of the supply chain, that could your client could be the tier 1, or if you're a tier 1, the client could be the commissioner of the project. So what we look for here is that you have a controlled, documented process of how you ensure you first define the customer expectations with respect to BIM delivery, that you have a system of collecting data and information, and that information is managed, and then we have this continual feedback loop, which is aligned with your 9001. So this is actually an extension of a 9001 clause, but we ensure that it's focused on BIM specific deliverables. So that's the first additional requirement. And then the second additional requirement is or the group felt, should I say, that the key parameter, or at least one of the key parameters of how successfully a BIM project is being delivered is related to how collaboratively the supply chain are engaging with each other. So we want the kite mark to reflect this. We want kite mark to reflect best practice in collaboration. So this was one of the additional requirements that we looked for. So what we look for is that you have real examples of how you've worked collaboratively with your supply chain. So we're looking for case studies really, and here are some examples of things that are examples that we found in the past. So perhaps you conduct workshops with your supply chain or members of your supply chain. Perhaps you provide training on processes or software, on-site or online support, software support, assessment feedback, any publications. So this isn't an exhaustive list, but here's some examples of things that you may be doing to promote collaboration within your BIM projects. So that's it. So here's the summary of what you need to demonstrate in order to comply with our certification scheme. So the first, we have compliance against PAS 1192 Part 2, which brings in elements of BS 1192 and BS 1192 Part 4. We then have the ISO 9001 equivalent system. We have management of client satisfaction, and incidentally, there's a standard ISO 10004 which describes that in more detail. There's in collaborative engagement with the supply chain. Again, there's a standard BS 11000 that describes that in detail. We look at project assessment against contract requirements. And lastly, we look at personal competency. So this is where we ensure we assess how you define, for all your internal BIM personnel, how you defining the roles and responsibilities, and what are the minimum competency requirements for each of those roles. So if you have a BIM manager, for example, what are the minimum competency requirements for a BIM manager, and how do you determine whether those competency requirements are being met? And that's our kite mark. So talked about the scope. We've talked about the evidence we look for, and the last thing I want to talk about is some of the practical requirements. So this is the assessment journey that we have. So what we first have is a one-day on-site gap analysis visit. So this is essentially an exercise of calibration, where we come to your site and we spend a day with you, and we look at where you are now against where you would need to be in order to comply with the scheme requirements for your final stage 2 assessment. Now, there's no pass nor fail in this, so it's simply an exercise to help you benchmark where you are. And because it's not a formal, because it's not a formal stage 1 assessment, we can weight any parts of this gap day depending on on your strengths or weaknesses as you perceive it. And our gap visits have gone down very well, and our clients have found them very, very informative. On completion of that, depending on how well your gap day goes, so you can then move on to your stage 2 assessment. So that gap could be as little as a week or two, or it could be months. But this is all depend on you as an organisation. We then have your on-site stage 2 assessment. Now, the duration of that assessment will be based on the scope of activities, so the things that I was talking about earlier. So what information do you generate, and what management responsibilities do you have? Do you have your own supply chain, for example? So this will be our formal assessment on site, where we look at projects, and this will cover process, system, people, and projects. If that's successful, you would then be issued a Kite Mark certificate. And then, like all of our Kite Mark certification schemes, we require ongoing assessment activities. So what this means is that you'll be having a on-site annual assessment, the duration of which will again determine on the scope of your assessments. Great. Just a couple of slides to finish off. Just on the benefits or how we see Kite Mark can help the supply chain. So I mentioned that we wanted the Kite Mark to be applicable across all members of the supply chain, and there'll be a different scope or different things we look at for each of these three categories. So the client or specifier, the tier 1 contractors and designers, and then the supply chain partners. And we can see there's different benefits in adopting certification against PAS 1192 Part 2. Now, you may be asking if you're ready for the Kite Mark. So, based on the poll that we had earlier, I think there's quite an even mix of readiness. So, the first thing that needs to happen is you need to understand the requirements of BIM. So, at the moment, all the 1192 standards are free to download, so you can get them now. So, but the first task that needs to happen is you need to understand what BIM means to you as an organization. So what are the requirements for you as an organization in adopting BIM level 2? So once that's done, you have to look at embedding BIM into your organization. So this is ensuring that you have the processes, the BIM processes are applicable to you as an organization, are embedded. Once that's done, there's the applying BIM into a project. So this is the great step in seeing how BIM works in practice, and then from that you have a continual improvement mechanism where you will hopefully be learning from your application of BIM to improve your BIM's delivery in terms of efficiency and hopefully cost. We provide a lot of support and documentation. So this is just to give you a snapshot of the types of documents that we can support you with. So these include, Kite Mark readiness documents and what to expect in your gap. We provide detailed assessment plans. So this details how your assessments will be conducted, the durations, who needs to be there, and then we have a much more refined, what we call assessment matrices. So these are clause by clause breakdowns of what you need to comply with. So it's essentially the blueprint of our scheme. And a useful exercise is often before your assessments is to go through these assessment matrices to ensure that you're compliant to all of the scheme's requirements. Just some of the benefits in adopting Kite Mark certification. So commercial benefits. So I've just put a few examples here. Again, this is a non-exhaustive list, but principally, it provides evidence to support tenders. So one of the first slides I went through today was on the PAS 91 Table 8 PQQ document. So this supports tenders. It helps you improve operational effectiveness, increase market access, stay ahead of the competition, and hopefully this is more for supply chain members, helps you improve your position in when bidding for work for tier 1 organizations. And then of course you have the practical benefits. So a lot of these are applicable for all Kite Mark certifications, but for part 2, it helps you understand, or helps you check that you understand the requirements of PAS 1192 Part 2. So this is essentially checking that how you understand it is how it's understood across the sector. We have robust certification. So this is once it's in place, you can use certification to assure that you've effectively implemented it within your organization. And it also helps achieve buy-in within the business. So there's nothing like a focused assessment to sharpen the resolution of BIM adoption in an organisation, which is great. I'm going to leave you now, and I'm going to give you back to Rob for our next poll question.
Thanks a lot, Gary. Okay, so the next poll question is a bit similar to the last poll question that we did. However, it is asking about the greatest external challenge that you currently have facing your organization to adopt BIM. So do please select one. Tell us whether it's the lack of client demand for it, whether clients are uncertain of EIR requirements, whether everyone is BIM ready, so how do we actually stand out, whether the local authorities are unaware, and whether there's resistance from supply chain partners to adopt BIM. So the results of the poll is what you've said currently is the greatest external challenge facing your organization to adopt BIM. At the minute, you've said there's a lack of client demand, 27%. It's fairly high. Clients uncertain of EIR requirements. 50% of you said that this was the greatest external challenge. 4% of you said everyone is BIM ready, so how do we stand out? 4% of you said that local authorities are unaware, and 15% of you said that there is a resistance from supply chain partners to adopt BIM. I think what I'm going to do right now is to hand you over to Pete to carry on with the presentation.
Okay, thanks, Rob. Yes, I mean, looking at those results, it's fairly similar to what we see on a day-to-day basis. Client knowledge is a key one. I think over the last, perhaps over the last 4 or 5 years, a lot of the information around BIM has been driven mainly at lead contractors, lead designers, and perhaps hasn't filtered through to clients and the supply chain as well, which I think that poll shows. Client knowledge and client understanding of EIR requirements are probably one of the most common blockers we see for our clients. A client will ask for BIM, but they may not fully understand it. And just to pick up on one of the questions that we've had coming through this presentation, how clients can demonstrate their knowledge when they do have a knowledge. I'll come on to that in a moment. But like I said, there is a need here for both, if we say the BIM converts in the industry, but also bodies such as BSI to do an education piece and try and get that knowledge and that information down. And one of the things we're doing here at BSI is to work with our clients to really generate some understanding and knowledge amongst specifiers and amongst clients. So one of the things we do is we have a gentleman at BSI called Rob Hine. Rob Hine is our head of commercial engagement, and Rob works very closely with a number of different organizations to try and drive that information through through to clients. So Rob does a lot of work in trade media and at trade shows, but he's also very involved with some of the BIM for liaison groups. I know he's quite involved with BIM for NHS. HS2 as well, we supported an event recently. And we also work with a number of our tier 1s and also our tier 2s to drive information directly to their clients. So we'll support them with supply chain open days and open days for their clients to really help them understand, what BIM is about. Also, the BSI client mark and our verification scheme, we offer the largest BIM certification scheme in the UK as well. And this is also growing globally. So one of the key things that came out of the shaping groups was that it had to have global recognition. Now, whether your business globe, if you like, is within the county you work in the UK, or whether it is truly international, the client mark should be recognised or recognisable throughout your business world. We don't just work with the specifiers in the UK, though. We work with people over in Dubai, and Gary will probably lead on to this. We've done some good work with the RTA out in Dubai, trying to raise the profile in China and Hong Kong. Ant Bird there in the middle top row is our head of built environment standards for the standards arm, and he's gone out to generate more understanding of the adoption of the British standards. Gary's also done some work out there with clients and their supply chains and their clients as well, in fact. And moving further afield as well, Australia, we've recently presented to the Australian British Chamber of Commerce. We've done a workshop with Transport for New South Wales. And we also meet with a lot of key industry stakeholders to try and drive that information And this really sort of ties in with 3 of those points. You know, local authorities are unaware. We are trying to support you with that. Lack of client demand, again, this sort of supports with it, and clients uncertain of the EIR requirements. Through the events we run in conjunction with our clients, we're really trying to help them understand what their responsibilities are in the process as well. One of the other points that's been raised there that's quite high is the supply chain understanding. And again, this is something that, you know, I touched on a moment ago. So one of the things we've done with a number of our tier ones is try to gather their supply chains together into a room and run a supply chain event, so they can let their clients or their supply chain know what they expect from them, but we can also help educate and go through, you know, what the standards require, what they would need to demonstrate up the line. Now, just touching on that question from earlier, you know, how can a client demonstrate their capabilities, or a supply chain member, in fact, demonstrate their capabilities? Our certification schemes don't just work for tier 1 contractors, tier 2 supply chain partners, they also work for clients as well. So clients will be working in accordance with these standards, and what we'll look at is how those standards apply to that business, and also how they implement them and how they embed them. As long as that's fit for purpose, we could potentially offer those certifications across, which is one of the things we've done with the RTA in Dubai. So they're certified as a client. So actually, some of the schemes we operate can be used not just for tier 1s, not just for tier 2s, but can be used by clients as well. But like I said, just to go back to that supply chain element, like I said, we can support you with information for your supply chain. When we first started working on this, we produced the little book of BIM, which I would say you can download from our website as well, which you can also share with your clients, and we'll put a link out to that as well, I imagine, fairly sharply on our Twitter as well. Just to go into some of the other areas, because again, we've looked at design and construction there quite heavily, but we have recently launched some new schemes which may help support you if you're a manufacturer or if you're responsible for managing assets as well. We launched our design and construction kite mark back in December 2016 at REBA. But in July this year at our head office in Milton Keynes, we launched our 2 new kite marks for asset management and BIM objects as well. The first companies certified against asset management were NG and Atkins, and the first 2 certified against BIM objects were Warvin and also Legrand Electric. What we're looking to do is produce a modular approach to BIM Level 2, because BIM Level 2 as a whole isn't just about PAS 1192 Part 2, it's about the whole suite of standards. So we want to be able to produce a modular approach to becoming BIM Level 2 certified. The information security element is in the shaping group phase at the moment, and that is ongoing, so we expect that to be launched early 2018. But obviously stay tuned to BSI's Twitter and BSI's LinkedIn, and you'll see some information on that coming in the future. So just to give you a nod as to where we've gone and where we're going as well, we launched the verification scheme against PAS 1192 Part 2 back in December 2015, and the kite mark for PAS 1192 Part 2 was launched in December 2016. Earlier this year, we launched the asset management kite mark and BIM objects kite mark, and what we're looking to do next year is launch something around BIM information security, whether that takes the the form of a separate kite mark. Like I said, it's going through the shaping group at the moment. But I suppose the most interesting bit here is that we are moving to an ISO situation where at the moment the ISO is in draft international standard format, and I believe that we're currently working on where the standard is. It's whether it's going to be finally published or if it's going to go to a final draft version for comment before that happens. Naturally, if you're certified to PAS 1192 Part 2 or Part 3 or the BIM objects, you may wonder, well, how would that apply to me if the ISO comes in? And it would work very similar to how we have we offer transitions to other standards. So, for instance, ISO 9001 transitioned in 2015, and we offered our clients a 3-year transition period to move to the new version. While we haven't fully worked out quite how that will work, purely on the basis that the ISO has not been published yet, we perceive that that would work in exactly the same way. There will be a transition period, and from what we've seen, obviously the PAS 1192 standards have formed the basis of the ISO, so it shouldn't be too onerous for people to transition to that as well. If you feel that there's some more support we could offer you, we offer BIM training courses. At the moment, these cover 4 main areas. We offer a BIM fundamentals course, which gives a really good base understanding of how BIM works, some of the key terminology. and the processes involved. Going a little bit deeper, we offer BIM process and procedures training. So that takes what we go through in fundamentals and goes into it in a little bit more detail for people who are a little bit further down the line. For those looking for a more in-depth understanding of COBie, we offer a BIM information management training course. And for those companies that are there or thereabouts but just want to be able to put it into their organization, we offer a one-day BIM implementation training course, which should help you get that information into your business. We also offer these courses both in a classroom setting and also in-house as well. So please do ask some questions if you're interested in looking at those. The courses apply to anyone who has, for instance, operational understandings, but it can also apply to management, and also some of the courses are more for the strategic aim as well. There's a couple of future events that we're running. The first is at UK Construction Week on the 10th of October. Between 10 AM and 5 PM, we are running the BSI Construction Forum. There are various different sections that are going to be held throughout the day. And then we are also going to be at the ICE Shaping a Digital World conference on the 13th of October. Later on in that month as well, we've got Digital Construction Week. We have a standards update coming from one of our colleagues in the standards arm of the business. And our other certification manager in the digital environment space, Gavin Summerson, is going to be presenting on some of the work we're doing on smart cities as well. If you're interested, you can contact us through these details here. We have a telephone number and an email address specifically set up for BIM queries.
So now with our questions and answers section, let's see what questions we have in. Okay, so one of the questions that has come in is about how can the industry get more clients to buy into BIM, as this seems to be one of the biggest challenges we're facing. And I think Pete's got his hand up for this one. I think we're probably going to go with Pete for this. Okay, Pete?
Okay, thanks, Rob. Yeah, I think with this one, specifier engagement and client engagement is absolutely key. And we're doing a lot of work with that with our clients. You've seen some of the slides that we put up there of some of the work we do worldwide. It is ultimately, the responsibility of the industry to do this, to drive demand as well. And I think one of the keys here is maybe changing the discourse in construction from a lowest common denominator one to a value-driven discourse. That would ultimately be the way forward. What is the value in this rather than what will this cost me? If a client can see the value that adopting or understanding BIM carries, then they'll be more likely to invest in it and drive demand. It's not going to be easy. I think it's fair to say, and it's definitely not going to be quick. But more businesses adopting BIM process and procedures and working with their clients, coupled with the work that BSI and others are doing to drive the information through the clients as well, will ultimately drive interest and knowledge amongst clients. So I think that sort of fairly covers that one.
Thanks a lot, Pete. Okay, so another question which we have come in is it's about how are you ensuring that your certification is not UK specific and is applicable internationally? And I think this is probably one for Gary. So Gary, over to you, please.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, I think this is in my camp. So this is one of the key requirements of all of our BIM schemes, that it's not just a UK centric scheme. Now, of course, the UK or the UK government are putting a lot of effort into widespread adoption of BIM, and at least from my exposure, I would say that the UK BIM climate is a very fertile one compared with a lot of other countries, but yeah, so there are some clauses within the PAS standards that do lean towards a UK centric viewpoint. So what we did when developing the scheme is to make sure that all the UK focused elements are looked at from an international point of view. So, for example, for that would be the use of a classification system. Now Uniclass is cited within the PAS, so that's a formal classification scheme to ensure that everyone's calling the same thing, everyone's classifying objects in the same way. So we don't mandate that you use Uniclass system. All we ask is that there is a classification system adopted. So internationally, for example, in the States there's Omniclass. and there's a lot of other classifications out there. Another example is COBie. So that's the BS 1192 Part 4. So I mentioned that does fall in the scope of certification, but only when the client asks for it. So we're not saying that you need to deliver COBies on every project, only that if asked, you have the capability of delivering COBies. So again, the way in which we look at that is that you don't have to use the COBie schema, but we do require that when asked, you transfer information in a structured way. And there's also references to things like digital plan of works and the Reba work stages. So all these are examples of where we try to take a practical approach and look at what the clause is essentially asking for, and keeping a flexible approach internationally. And you know, I've worked with companies in Dubai, in Hong Kong. We're working with companies in Australia. So there is a difference on how BIM is being defined and specified. So what's contained in the EIR, if there is an EIR. And this is something that we're helping with. And as Pete mentioned before, we have a certification against or for clients in order to help clients understand that, you know, if they specify the information requirements clearly up front, then the whole project team knows exactly what they're delivering to contractually, and makes for a more successful delivery of the project.
Thank you very much, Gary. Okay, so our next question is about getting a realistic view of a BIM focused company and what they should be doing to implement to achieve their goals. And I think this is probably one for Pete. So over to you for this one, Pete.
Well, it's a good question, and it really does depend on, you know, what their goals are. I'd say if the goal is to be BIM level 2 compliant, a set of processes or procedures that work in accordance with the relevant standards, you know, BS 1192 Part 4 for COBie, PAS 1192 Part 2, and PAS 1192 Part 5 for information security, having a set of processes and procedures that work in accordance with those, having an understanding and a knowledge of government soft landings, and, you know, potentially using the CIC BIM protocol or the NBS toolkit. Those coupled with having systems capable of running this sort of thing, or I suppose I should probably caveat there with systems capable and fit for purpose as well. You know, having all of those elements ticked off would make a business, you know, sort of able to be claimed to be BIM level 2 compliant. Obviously, the senior business development manager for BIM schemes in me is going to obviously say certification will also help that as well, help demonstrate that at least the PAS 1192 Part 2 part of BIM level 2 you are compliant with. But yeah, those would be a good start, I would suggest.
Thanks a lot, Pete. Okay, so we've got a question which has come in about, I think it was one of the slides which showed that PAS 1192 Part 3 is to be used across use and decommission. Surely that is used from start to finish. And I think it was probably a slide that maybe had to do with Gary. So Gary, over to you. Do you want to take this one, please?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Yes, you're right. So that slide is probably a bit too simplistic. So you're right. So the whole philosophy of BIM is starting with the end in mind, and the end in mind is the in-use phase of the asset. So the asset management phase, which is described in Part 3. Now, so arguably the Part 3 should have been published to begin with, well, before Part 2, but it wasn't, for good or bad. So so you're right. So a true BIM process Part 3 should be should begin the journey. So, and then from the activities in Part 3, that then specifies the EIR. So so you're right. I mean, for our Part 2 certification, what we don't do is we don't look at aspects of PAS 1192 Part 3, but there is definitely a link between the two. And when we're not talking about it now, but our certification scheme scope for our Part 3 scheme does look at those links. So if you're generating what's called an AIR, an Asset Information Requirements document, in compliance with Part 3, how does that inform your EIR? So you're right that in order to fully implement BIM level 2 the way it should be done, part 3 should be used prior to the use of part 2.
Okay, that's excellent. Thank you very much, Gary, for that answer. We've got a question. Actually, we've got a double question here, and this one is about the BSI certification summary document to refer back to when planning for certification, and also about can we get supporting documents from BSI for free? And I think Pete's indicating he'd like to have a stab at this. So, yep, here you go, Pete.
Thanks, Rob. Yes, essentially is the answer to that. We will provide you with a summary document to refer to when planning for certification, and that is completely free of charge. Just to rattle through just a couple more here, the same person's asked, how would you become part of the focus group? Obviously, if you've asked that question, we'll get in touch with you after this. So that's it. And also, just to go back to the original point about a certification summary document, someone also has asked if there's a generic document summarising the scope for an MEP subconsultant. We can, that same document, because it will list the clauses essentially that we would look for, what we ask is that you make it relevant to your business. So if you are an MEP subconsultant, you will probably find that you're declaring compliance with different clauses to maybe a lead contractor. We can share that with you, and then it's for you to demonstrate your compliance with the sections that apply.
Okay, thank you very much, Pete. So without further ado, I'm going to thank Gary and Pete, and of course you, the audience, for joining us today. We certainly hope you've enjoyed the webinar. Thank you very much, and we hope to hear from you soon. Goodbye.